Hello, I'm Bruce Wheeler. I have the honor, the privilege of serving as SRNT's Executive Director. Rather than telling you about our upcoming virtual annual meeting myself, I am going to enlist the aid of my 94-year-old father, Barclay Wheeler, retired English professor.
Don't I need makeup? Please register to attend the SRNT annual meeting. Bruce, what's a SRNT?
Not SNRT, SRNT. It's an acronym.
I'm Barclay Wheeler. Bruce, my son, works for you. When Bruce was a little boy, did you know your mother kept the ventriloquist dummies? They're under the bed in your bedroom. Well, I can ad-lib a little, you know. Should I tell them I used to smoke?
Sure.
Well, I started smoking in the Army, but one day I decided to quit. I used to go to educational conferences. Can I go to this one? I have an iPad.
Okay, Dad, look at the camera and say, register for the SRNT 2021 virtual annual meeting.
Register for the 2021
SRNT
virtual annual meeting.
Take 10.
Should I have worn a tie for this?
Take 22.
I know, Dad, but I'm not sure they want to hear you quote Keats.
Well, how about if I do just a couple of passages? Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Much have I traveled in the realms of gold, and many goodly states and kingdoms seen.
Take 38. Take 47.
Well, I'm aiming to get top billing on this, I'll tell you.
Take 51.
Shouldn't you be using a real camera?
Take 57.
Say, I'm an old cowhand from the Rio Grande.
I'm an old cowhand from the Rio Grande.
Take 68.
Cut.
Take 73. Take 85. Take 89. 97.
Great, Dad. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Do we really think this is a good idea?
There were some really wonderful things about that virtual meeting, weren't there? And it's even better to be back in person. So welcome, everybody. It is with great joy that we thank Bruce for sharing his father with us. His father passed last year. So thank you, Bruce, for sharing that with us. I'd also like to thank our sponsors before we get too much further into this conference, DLH Corp., Dr. Vince Clinical Research, and the FDA Center for Tobacco Products. Thank you for helping us make this research sharing and exchange and collaboration opportunity happen. Much appreciated. Before we get started with the awards ceremony, if we could have the first slide. I don't know how many people, I'll find out. Raise your hand, please, if you filled out the survey, the pre-conference survey. So, all right. Raise your hand if you're dying to know the results. Okay, less people dying than actually filled out the survey. But here we go. One of the reasons that we sponsored this survey is we really wanted to understand similarities and differences, common ground in places where we differ. So I'll tell you right now, there is a lot of common ground in terms of professional identity, right? The vast majority of folks that are attending this meeting are scientists, mixed in with clinicians, administrators, and a couple artists, which I think is absolutely fantastic. No chefs at this point. SRNT is most people's primary identity. Well, not most, but that's definitely the plurality. But we have a lot of folks that attend lots of different meetings and have lots of different society memberships. Almost everybody agrees that commercial tobacco cigarettes represent a significant public health threat. This is a common ground, which makes sense. That's part of the mission of SRNT, right, is to help reduce the costs, personal and economic, social, community-based, that are related to commercial tobacco use and nicotine use. But we have some differences, right? There's differences in whether or not people believe that e-cigarettes represent a harm to adolescents, a potential benefit to adult smokers, or people that believe both. And so that, again, is a place where we differ. And as we talked about in the pre-conference workshop, it's a place to have thoughtful conversations so that we can understand different positions. Favorite snacks? You know, I was pretty impressed to see that this is another area of diversity among all of us, and I would love to meet the people who are able to not snack, because I could use the tips, for sure. Definite common ground, warm vacation locations. So I hate to say it, but I think it's going to be 70 degrees here, and coming from Wisconsin, that sounds really nice. The amount of conflict. People think the amount of conflict at SRNT is just right. For the most part. Some folks could use a little more discussion, a little more challenge. Some people want to make sure that we're staying as respectful as we can. But for the most part, it looks like we have common ground, that we have a good amount of challenge when we talk to each other from SRNT. But again, significant diversity in ideal superpowers, but perpetual funding did slightly edge out flying. So that's how that all worked out. So again, I want to thank you for doing this. It was sort of a fun exercise, but it was also done to really help us understand each other a little bit and where we differ and the common ground that we have. And so with that, I'm going to segue into one of my favorite sessions, which is the awards session. Normally, Tom Glynn, who's the awards committee chair, would be doing this, but he's not able to be here today. This is one of my absolute favorite parts of SRNT's annual meeting. It is a chance to celebrate the scientific contributions of our colleagues and to learn some amazing research, and it really also illustrates the breadth of the Society's scientific endeavors, highlighting both extensive lifetime service as well as people who are just beginning in the field and are already starting to make waves. Before we start with the award winners, I also want to personally thank again Bruce Wheeler, Nan Knutson, and Brooke Miller for their hard work that goes into making this process run smoothly in terms of identifying and selecting the award winners. Tom Glynn, when I spoke with him, was quite clear that he could not have done this as the chair of the awards committee for the 5+ years without them. In fact, he says to you all, thank you to Bruce, Nan, Brooke for their hard work in making the awards process run smoothly and making it so easy for the committee members to do their job. So thank you all, and on to the awards. So we're going to start with the best abstract winners. So we have 3 of the best abstract winners. These winners were chosen by our program chairs for their scientific excellence. So first we have Francisco Cartuano Barrera. If you are in the audience, please stand. I can't see, so, oh, there. Congratulations. And our next is Dr. Lisbeth Cruz Jimenez, if you're in the audience. Please stand. No? All right, well, we'll congratulate Dr. Cruz Jimenez if we see her. And the final is Dr. candidate Alexis Monacal from the University of Chicago. If you're in the audience. Oh, there she is. Congratulations. All right, and then every year we have a best paper winner. Oh, I'm sorry. I screwed up my count. We do have another abstract winner, a couple more. And so Anpreet Sidhu, Dr. Sidhu, are you here? All right, well, we'll congratulate Dr. Sidhu. And Minjian Yang, are you here? Oh, there she is. Congratulations. Well done. Very exciting. Every year, we're starting to do this as well, which is recognize the best paper winner. These papers were nominated based on their number of downloads from NTR. These are NTR papers, citations, or the Altmeric Attention Score, and then selected by the Publications Committee. And this year's winner is Nicholas Pelliron and his colleagues for the impact of tobacco smoking on the risk of of COVID-19, a large-scale retrospective cohort study. So, Dr. Pelleron, you're here? Congratulations. All right, and as folks know, we have fellows. We have different classes of fellows who have been acknowledged as outstanding contributors in the field of nicotine and tobacco science and for their service to SRNT. So if you are one of the 2022 fellows and you're in the room, please stand so that we can thank you for your contributions to science and the society. Wonderful. Thank you. And now, I'm not sure if Dr. Pebbles-Fagan is in the audience at this point, but I would once again like to acknowledge her as the award winner for the President's Award in 2022. Dr. Fagan's contributions to nicotine and tobacco science and health equity are impressive and inspiring. Her talk yesterday was just incredible, and if you didn't get a chance to watch, I highly recommend that you go back. You'll be able to find it on the SRNT YouTube channel shortly, and I highly encourage you to watch it. Her service to SRNT laid critical groundwork for our health equity network, and as a founder and a mentor to many different network leaders, she just has made a huge contribution, and so congratulations again to Dr. Fagan. We also want to recognize that we have lost one of our members this year. We had asked for solicitations to find out about who had passed and who had retired, so we could also acknowledge their contributions at the ends of their careers. So in memoriam, we'd like to recognize Matus Zatansky. So he made a substantial contribution, and we're thankful for that. And as I said, there are others who have recently retired. Bob Croyle, Gary Giovino, John Hughes, T.H. Lam, M. Jane Lewis, and Steve Tiffany. So thank them for all of their excellent contributions. And we'll hope, if any of you are here and would like to stand, we'd love to be able to acknowledge you. But hopefully they're all retired and they might be doing something else, which is lovely as well. And I would like to highlight specifically two people who retired this year. So Bob Croyle was the former director of the Division of Cancer Control and Population Sciences at NCI. And it was through his guidance that we were able to have so many scientists receive funding from NCI to do the critical work in tobacco science. And I would also like to acknowledge John Hughes, whose retirement this year was a huge sort of milestone, as he was the very first president of SRNT. So again, Dr. Croyle and Dr. Hughes have laid the foundation for nicotine and tobacco science, and they've done it for decades. Their brilliance, vision, and passion for helping others has had an enormous impact on the field and the society, and so I'd just like to give them a special acknowledgement. So thank you to them both. And there's one additional person that we would like to acknowledge, someone who's planning his retirement right after this meeting, Mitch Zeller. So the SRNT board would like to share the following resolution. Mitch, I know you're here, I saw you. Could you come up, please? Come on up. So, all right, and Bruce, do you want to do the honors?
Stay there.
Oh, I guess, wait, Wait, this isn't what we planned.
The board asked me to do this. I'm not sure that was a good idea. Would you please hold this? Oh, God. We're going to make it work. Okay. No, I'll take it now. Whereas Mitch Zeller, you need to hold this, undisputed king of the FDA, is also the undisputed world's biggest fan of the Broadway classic Les Miserables. And whereas Mitch Zeller, king of the blah, 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 is such a big fan that he can sing each and every song from Les Mis in the original French.
That's not true.
And whereas Mitch is such a big fan of Les Mis that on slow days in the office, he wears a beret and a red sweatshirt that says Master of the House in big white letters. And whereas Mitch is such a big fan of Les Mis that for one brief period in the summer of 2019, he built a barricade of office furniture in front of his door, hung a French flag on the wall, and locked himself in his office for a week. And whereas on day 3 of said barricade, Mitch got hungry and started texting his staff to ask for, and I quote, crepes, pommes frites, and escargot. And whereas Mitch calls his administrative assistant, Bill Loy, Cosette, and Bill calls Mitch 24601, and whereas I think we can all agree that we would like Mitch to stay at CTP for, and there is a video cue. So, now be it resolved that I, Bruce Wheeler, omnipotent executive czar of the Society for Research on Nicotine and Tobacco, do hereby honor Mitch Zeller on the grand occasion of his being recognized as the #1 Les Mis fan in the world. I mean his retirement from CTP. Bruce Wheeler, Executive Director. Congratulations, Mitch.
Thank you.
And that is yours
Bruce, I don't think that was the one that the board approved. I think we have a different one. I think that was your first draft.
Never mind. Okay, sorry, Mitch.
Oh, you're not done. There is a board-approved version. It does not come with a video clip. It does come with a recognition that whereas Mitch Zeller became director of the Center for Tobacco Products in 2013, where he has led FDA's efforts to reduce disease and death from tobacco and previously unavailable information about its dangers to light through the regulation of manufacturing, marketing, and distribution of products, and then proceeds to list many of his accomplishments. Therefore, be it resolved on this day, 16 March 2022, the Society for Research in Nicotine and Tobacco congratulates Mitch Zeller on the occasion of his retirement from the FDA Center for Tobacco Products and extends the gratitude of the nicotine and tobacco community, including tobacco scientists and other healthcare professionals and tobacco control advocates, for Mitch Zeller's leadership, countless contributions to global public health, and tireless efforts to combat the many health risks posed by the consumption of tobacco products. Thank you.
I know there's a lot more business to conduct here. I just want to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you. SRNT has a very big place in my professional heart, even though I'm not a scientist or a researcher and I don't even attempt to play one on TV. But in that space where the worlds of science and regulation and policy and law come together, is the world where we in CTP live, and all of you make vital contributions to inform the thinking and the policy. And I look forward to remaining a part of the SRNT family in my retirement. This, both the Les Mis stuff from Bruce, because Bruce and I share a love of Broadway musicals, and the very sincere resolution from the board, from the bottom of my heart. Thank you very much.
All right, we have more awards, more amazing scientists to acknowledge. And so, although Tom couldn't be here, he was able to pre-record his remarks. So we will start with the 2022 awards from Tom Glynn.
Thank you, Megan. Good morning to everyone. And let me add my congratulations to the abstract winners, our new fellows, and both Pebbles and Mitch. I will also add my welcome to the 2022 SRNT Awards ceremony, and my apologies for not being able to join with you all in person. I'm Tom Glynn, chair of the SRNT Awards Committee, and which for this year's awards consisted of myself, immediate past president Suchitra Krishnan Saran, current president Megan Piper, incoming president Patricia Nez Henderson, and former Ove Furno awardee Sharon Hall. I've said before that being on the awards committee offers one of the most pleasurable, challenging opportunities SRNT membership has to offer. We get to see the astounding accomplishments of many of our members, but also must take on the nearly impossible task of selecting each year a single outstanding award recipient. I applaud the committee's diligence in doing just that once again this year. We have awards today in 3 categories: the Jarvik Russell Early Career Award, the John Slade Award, and the Ove Furno Clinical Research Award. And detailed descriptions of these awards may be found in the SRNT program. We begin with the Jarvik Russell Early Career Award, named for tobacco control research pioneers Murray Jarvik and Michael Russell, and which recognizes scientists who, early in their careers, have made extraordinary contributions to the field of nicotine and tobacco research. This year's recipient of the Jarvik Russell Award is Dr. Jessica Barrington Trimmis. Jessica received her PhD in epidemiology from the University of Southern California in 2014 and is currently an assistant professor of population and public health sciences at the USC Keck School of Medicine, where she directs the USC Epidemiology of Substance Use Research Group. Jessica's nomination for this award was made by a truly all-star team of investigators from a number of institutions, and one of her nomination letters noted that she is exceedingly energetic. I would say that, viewing all that she has accomplished since receiving her doctoral degree in 2014, that comment is one of the greatest understatements of all time. With a focus, although by no means an exclusive one, on tobacco regulatory science, Jessica has published more than 100 papers and has already made, in the words of one nominator, seminal contributions to the tobacco control literature. With all that Jessica has accomplished in the few years since receiving her doctoral degree, we can only imagine what is yet to come and the enormous contributions she will be making to tobacco control and public health. Jessica, please come to the stage for photos and a few words.
Okay, I'll say just a couple of words. So I guess I wasn't prepared for this. I wasn't told I needed to say words here. But of course, thank you to everybody who has been tremendously supportive. I had a lot of people who believed in me over the years and who just encouraged me to jump in head first and take chances. And I think without sort of all of that support and the many mentors in this room and who are joining us virtually, I wouldn't be here. So thank you. I'm really honored to receive this and really grateful to SRNT and for everybody who nominated me and selected me for this award. So thank you all.
Congratulations once again, Jessica. We now move on to the John Slade Award, which honors individuals who have made outstanding contributions to public health and tobacco control through science-based public policy research and public advocacy. This award, of course, is named after our late SRNT member and researcher advocate, Dr. John Slade. This year's recipient of the Slade Award is Dr. Christine Del Nevo. Chris embodies the ideals John Slade laid out for us. She's a meticulous researcher who has had enormous influence on the public policy outcomes of that research. Chris recognizes the essential value research brings to policy and regulation, but in the tradition of John Slade, also recognizes, in her own words, that scholarly products are not enough to influence policy and regulation, and that active engagement via various communication platforms, such as congressional and legislative testimony, press interviews and releases, social media postings, and engagement with policymakers, are also essential elements in promoting effective science-based public health policies and regulations. Chris also, like her mentor and fellow New Jerseyan, John Slade, clearly packs 36 hours into every day. She conducts seminal research, supervises and mentors many students, holds numerous academic leadership positions, has a range of academic appointments, is a recipient of many awards and counting, is active in a number of professional societies, including, of course, SRNT, serves on a large body of national expert advisory committees, and engages in a wide array of community service activities. And that's just what she does before noon every day. Chris Del Nevo, as a scientist advocate, is clearly an exceptionally worthy recipient of the SRNT John Slade Award. Chris, please come up for photos and say a few words.
This is really touching. I don't know about the before noon. I am not a morning person. But, you know, it is always meaningful to be recognized by your peers for awards such as this. But this one it means a lot to me. More than 2 decades ago, I, along with a number of other junior faculty, were mentored by John for a few brief years. And often, as I do my work and have struggled at times to figure out how to approach something, I've often asked myself, what would John do? And that has often served as a great opportunity to kind of ground myself and to figure out the path forward. So thank you very much.
Chris, congratulations again. Our final award this morning is the Ferno Clinical Research Award. A Ferno Award, named after Ove Ferno, honors scientists who have made groundbreaking advances in clinical research. This year's awardee is Dr. Kenneth Perkins, a colleague of mine for, gasp, 40 years, since he was a young NIDA grantee. As you will soon hear, Ken is the most worthy recipient of this award, and he has asked the 2019 Ferno Award recipient, Dr. Karen Lehrman, the director of the USC Norris Comprehensive Cancer Center, Associate Dean for Cancer Programs, and the H. Leslie and Elaine S. Hoffman Cancer Research Chair at the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California, to introduce him. Karen, please come to the podium.
Hello, I'm Karen Lerman, and it is my great honor to introduce my colleague and friend, Kenneth A. Perkins, PhD, a luminary in the tobacco and nicotine research field. As professor of psychiatry at the University of Pittsburgh, Ken has been funded by NIH since 1986 for research focused largely on 2 broad themes. One theme emphasizes translational studies, drawing upon preclinical findings to examine acute effects of nicotine and cigarette smoking that may explain the persistence of tobacco dependence in humans. This work was recognized in 2020 by Division 28, the Psychopharmacology and Substance Abuse section of the American Psychological Association, with the Med Associates Brady Schuster Award for Outstanding Behavioral Science Research in Substance Abuse. The second theme aims at improving clinical treatments for smoking cessation, recently focusing on the development, validation, and extension of an efficient procedure for evaluating whether new medications are efficacious for helping smokers to quit. A key project over the past 15 years is focused on developing and validating an efficient procedure for initial screening of novel treatments for evidence of efficacy in smoking cessation, intended to inform how to proceed with subsequent randomized clinical trials research on those novel treatments. This procedure, developed by Dr. Perkins, is called CREATE, Crossover Evaluation of Addiction Treatment Efficacy, and Ken will share some of this work during his lecture today. Once this procedure was confirmed as sensitive to efficacious drugs and specific in identifying non-efficacious drugs, he then proceeded to use the procedure for its ultimate intended purpose, that of evaluating novel compounds for evidence of efficacy in aiding smoking cessation. This work has transformed the field of nicotine dependence drug development, and we all know Ken to be a truly exceptional scientist, and no one is more deserving of this award. So Ken was program chair of the inaugural SRNT meeting in 1995 and elected SRNT president in 2001. He's also a fellow of the APA, SRNT, and the Society of Behavioral Medicine. Ken, congratulations on receiving the Furno Award from SRNT. Please come to the stage to receive your award. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. Greetings from beautiful downtown Pittsburgh, as you can see. So these are my disclosures. The grants listed at the top are directly relevant to what I'll be talking about, including some involving Karen's involvement, which she nicely set up the introduction to this talk. And then other current support is also listed. It's generally not relevant to what I'll be talking about. Oops. All right, well, so when I got word of this award, I was really honored, but I thought, well, what am I going to talk about? So I literally went to the website to see, well, exactly who is eligible for this award. So it said it honors scientists who have made groundbreaking advances in these three areas: pharmacological and behavioral actions of nicotine, increased understanding why people smoke, and then like interventions. Well, early in my career, I focused on the first couple of areas, and really critical to that was developing a nasal spray method of administering rapid and controlled doses of nicotine per se to humans. So the bottle shown here is not our bottle, but our bottle was exactly like this, identical. And again, this was about mid-1980s, so this is about a decade before Nicontrol came on the market. So what we used this bottle for was just a variety of types of studies for those first two criteria for the Furno Award winner. We looked at pharmacological and behavioral actions of nicotine, like looking at nicotine and energy balance to look at the weight gain issue with smoking. We combined nicotine with other behavioral manipulations like stress, discriminative stimulus effects of nicotine, and then also reinforcement enhancing effects of nicotine much more recently. Then we also use this spray to look at why people use tobacco as well. So nicotine tolerance related to dependence. We looked at rapid nicotine to reduce craving. We used the spray to develop our nicotine choice procedure. And then we also started looking at systematic individual differences in sensitivity to nicotine, and particularly sex differences. But I decided to focus here on our later research on clinical interventions in Area 3, partly because Ove Furno, for whom the award is named, was creator of the first effective medication for cessation, nicotine gum. And I found out in this interesting interview with him, he was one of the very first to successfully quit himself while the nicotine gum was being developed. So in this project that I'm going to be talking about, which Karen already sort of introduced, we looked for a more efficient drug screening procedure to inform whether or not a candidate drug should proceed to larger clinical trials. So what I'm going to do is, the overview of the talk is, I'm going to spend some time talking about the rationale for this more efficient phase 2 procedure. So 20 years ago, I was finishing up my year as SRNT president, just about when I was getting started on this line of research. And I didn't know much about drug development process at all, especially the practical aspects of it. So I'm assuming that there are folks in the audience who also will be somewhat unclear on exactly how it works. So that's why I'm going to spend some time looking at the rationale and talking about it. Then I'll talk about the 3 main studies we did to develop, evaluate, and finalize the procedure using known effective medications as model drugs. And as Karen explained, and I didn't come up with this name until maybe 5 years ago. I figured it had to have a snappy name. It can't be just the Perkins procedure. Who knows what that is? So I said, well, how about CREATE, standing for Crossover Evaluation of Addiction Treatment Efficacy. So just something that will kind of give some idea of what it involves. So I'll talk about that, then I'll move on to our use since then of this procedure to look at the ultimate purpose, which is if you have a novel drug and you want to say, well, is there any efficacy for cessation at all? Well, let's test it, but let's do it in a very efficient way. And then finally, I'll finish up with some future directions. So this is the FDA drug development phases, and I know there are some FDA folks out there, and I certainly hope I don't step over my toes or whatever and not say something accurate, but I believe these carefully cover the situation with smoking cessation medications as well. So you have all these phases, starting with preclinical research and phase 1 first-in-human safety studies. And so that's really looking at toxicity and safety, basically. So you haven't even gotten to looking for efficacy. And so even before you get to efficacy, you've lost 2/3 of the compounds. So shown here are in the dots, basically, are the number of compounds you'd have to start with in the hopes of having one finish up passing all the way through the phases and being approved and marketed as a new medication. So 2/3 of them are gone even before you've looked at efficacy. So then, only then do you look at whether the drug even has any efficacy. And so I'm going to be focusing on that phase 2 process right there when you first want to know, is there any efficacy with this drug at all? So the thing to point out is, if you think you've been experiencing failure in the first 2 phases with safety and whatever, you're just beginning to experience failure with drug development. When it gets to phase 2 and you're looking for efficacy, 1 out of 5 will make it, 4 out of 5 fail. So that's the biggest drop-off point in the process from phase 2, hoping to get to phase 3. And so across phases, as the drug success drops, the costs escalate. So it's about $10 million on average just to find out if a drug has any efficacy at all. And you know going in, because 4 out of 5 on average are going to fail, you know that's probably going to be wasted money. So that really is an obstacle to even doing the study. And the Health and Human Services has certainly focused on this problem. In this publication, they talk about the largest barrier for conducting clinical research is the high cost, the length of time, and also patient recruitment issues. So as I said, the situation with smoking cessation medications is not better, that's for sure. So on the left are all the drugs that I could find a while ago. It's not all of them, but it's most of the ones that I could see had been tested for phase 2 efficacy with smoking cessation. And you can see on the right all the ones that were successful. Not many. A couple of second-line medications are included there too. But the rate of success from phase 2 to approval has got to be about 10% or less. So I thought at this point, to accelerate the drug discovery process, we really needed a more efficient phase 2 procedure to rule out these failures quickly and efficiently. So we wanted to provide a quicker answer to whether a drug is or is not efficacious with less cost. And so the benefits of this procedure would be saving resources, so due to the less cost of this procedure, more rapid decision whether a novel treatment even warrants continued working at all. If it fails, that's it, you're done. All the work in the earlier phases or whatever is just gone for naught, basically. So this is the point, the sink or swim point. So basically, you don't have to then go on to the higher cost late phase 2 and phase 3 trials if you're not going to show any success early on. Then finally, a more efficient yes-no signal lowers the risk of failure, and so will increase the probability that more compounds will be tested more quickly. So if that $10 million is an obstacle, well, if it's a lot less than that, it's less of a risk that failure is going to just sink your entire budget, basically. So with typical early phase 2 approaches, obviously one of them is a small clinical trial, which makes sense because the larger phase 2 and the phase 3 trials are randomized controlled trials. So you start off with a smaller one just to see is there any hint there of any efficacy. So you just randomize treatment-seeking smokers to active versus placebo and then follow them up, basically. Well, that's very valid, but it's not very practical. A small trial still needs a sufficient sample size, easily a couple hundred, to have the power to show a difference. A small trial also requires a big commitment, as I showed you before, easily $10 million on average. So what happens is these are often underpowered, and so the results are not very reliable. So another way to go about this is to try and get an early signal from phase 1 studies of safety or just preliminary small-scale studies of surrogate endpoints. So you look for drops in withdrawal or craving or amount of smoking maybe in non-treatment seeking smokers who are volunteering, and you just give them briefly active versus placebo drug. Well, that's very practical, but it's not very valid. Problem is the symptom relief with non-treatment seeking smokers is not very robust, and it doesn't predict clinical outcome in randomized trials. So I'll just give you one example here. This is actually a very nice study, very well controlled, of patch. So non-treatment seeking smokers who were volunteers participated in three-day periods inpatient to really make sure to have controls over everything. So 3 days on 21 milligram patch, 3 days on placebo patch, and then 3 days of ad lib smoking for the control. And so they definitely got withdrawal with the absence period, but as you can see, there was absolutely no difference between the placebo patch and the NRT patch. So that's completely contrary to what we know from clinical trials of symptom relief in actual treatment-seeking smokers undergoing a permanent quit attempt. So this brings me to CREATE, which again is crossover evaluation of addiction treatment efficacy. And I believe it optimizes the validity and practicality of these two different approaches, the small clinical trials or the surrogate marker studies. It kind of combines those in a valid and practical way. So for validity, we simulate the procedures of a clinical trial. So we study only smokers intrinsically motivated to quit. In other words, they're basically treatment seekers. We also look at daily 24-hour absence as the primary dependent measure. So not amount of smoking, not craving or withdrawal during enforced abstinence. But we retain practical advantages of lab studies. So it's a within-subject crossover design to increase power. It's a short duration due to temporary quit periods. And then it's a continuous outcome measure, the number of quit days, rather than dichotomous point prevalence at like during treatment and then 6 months later or whatever. So that greatly increases power as well. So I'm just going to step through some of these advantages in a little bit more detail to make sure everybody's kind of up to speed here. So by far the biggest advantage and the biggest saving in power is the crossover design. So participants get both active and placebo conditions during week-long periods of trying to quit. So the key here is the within-subject correlation of quit days between conditions. So the result is much smaller sample size needed because the only difference in quitting is solely due to the drug. So if you think about it, if the exact same participants with the same characteristics are getting both drug conditions, the only difference in their drug success has to be the drug condition. So I guess I didn't promise there'd be no math, but this is not as complicated as it looks. So basically, it's that within-subject correlation of quit days that's key. So basically, to equate the power of the sample size of a crossover design with that of a randomized controlled trial, you just take 1 minus the correlation over 2. So if you think about it, if there was absolutely no correlation at all between ability to quit on placebo, ability to quit on active, that correlation would be 0. So then the sample size would simply be 1/2. So instead of one group getting both conditions, you'd have each you'd randomize twice as large a group, and you half to one and half to the other. You'd have the same group size. But it turns out there's actually a pretty large correlation in days quit, about 0.5. And so you plug that into the equation. 1 minus 0.5 over 2 is 1/2 of what the 1/2 was. It's 0.25. In other words, only 1/4 as many participants needed to equal the power of a randomized controlled design. So if you had, say, 50 in a CREATE study, that would equal a randomized trial of 200 or 100 per condition. And this actually makes sense. So if you have a smoker who's very high dependent and kind of not that motivated, they're not going to quit at all on placebo. And maybe they'll get a couple of days active quitting with the active medication. Whereas if you have somebody who's not very dependent but is very highly motivated, you'll get a couple of quit days on the placebo and much more quitting with the active drug. So that's the basic idea. So other advantages is the continuous outcome measure, so the number of quit days rather than point prevalence. And the reason for that is the days quit in the first week of an actual quit attempt do predict later outcomes. And that's from this study with my colleagues at Penn. They did a number of large trials, and so they went back and looked at how much quitting success did these folks have in the first week, and how did that predict their end of trial outcomes 2 to 3 months later, and then their 6-month follow-up outcome. And they found a systematic increase in their success at those follow-up points by the number of days they were able to quit in that first week. So, and again, it's short duration. So in our studies, it's like 4 to 6 weeks, depending on the dose run-up period required. Whereas compared to a randomized trial, it's going to be 6 to 12 weeks for treatment and then months of follow-up. So this is how I see the breakdown of the FDA phases. You have these initial, what I would call non-clinical studies to look at toxicity and safety and whatever. Preclinical, obviously, and I've had discussions with the basic scientists this meeting and previous SRNTs about what kind of a model works in a preclinical model for actual desire to quit. And I don't think there really is one. But they certainly do a good job in looking at abuse liability and safety and toxicity, whatever. Then you move on to first-in-human studies to look at safety and toxicity or whatever. And that's often where they try to stick in the surrogate markers. But then you have to go on to the very different large and long trials of treatment seekers on late phase 2 and phase 3. So I think there's kind of a disconnect in these two sections, the early phases and then the later phases. And that's where I think our early phase 2 CREATE procedure really can act as a nice bridge from those earlier to the later by providing practical and valid data based on those two approaches, essentially. So the primary goal of our first 3 validation studies was to identify the optimal study sample for the CREATE. So basically to determine what kind of recruitment do we want, who do we want in these studies. So we asked the question, do effective cessation medications help all smokers quit or only those with high quit motivation? Second one was, does the source of quit motivation matter? So when I first started this, I thought, well, treatment seekers, non-seekers, that's all that really matters, right? Well, but Maxine Stitzer was a colleague of ours with this. And of course, she's been the prime developer of contingency management treatment, so she knew about paying people per quit day, basically, and said, hey, you know, you can temporarily at least increase their motivation to quit by just paying them. So I thought, well, that actually makes a lot of sense. So I was always thinking about intrinsic desire to quit by treatment seekers, non-seekers. So we thought, well, that would be extrinsic desire to quit. So you pay people or you don't. And so maybe we can test both of these ways to see which might be better. Maybe both is going to be needed. So in our first study, we used NRT patch as the model medication. And so we separately compared these two between subjects factors, these two methods of comparing high and low quit motivation. So the first one was intrinsic quit motivation, treatment seekers, non-seekers as defined here. And then we also randomized each of them to high and low extrinsic quit motivation, paying them $12 a day for being quit or 0. And we use CO less than 5 parts per million as a really stringent criterion to document 24-hour absence. We didn't want somebody coming in, passing the CO test, going out, smoking a couple cigarettes, then the next day come in, say, see, it's still CO less than 7, I'm still quit. No, we wanted really to document 24-hour absence. So then only one within subject factor, and that's the case with all of the studies I'll be talking about, all got NRT or placebo patch, 1 week each, counterbalanced order, basically. So the key comparison is not which of those 4 conditions in the 2x2 maximize the overall quit ability. It's which one maximized the sensitivity to the active versus placebo condition. We were looking for that difference. So what we really were most interested in was the interaction between the motivation factors, there's 2 of them, with the medication condition. So here's the timeline, very simple for an NRT patch study, not really much of a dose run-up period needed. So we'd have a week of baseline where they'd come in a couple times, start the patch, and then a week of trying to quit. So they had to come in every day, and so we would take their CO to validate their quit status. They'd remove the patch, and then they would just repeat the other condition the next 2 weeks. So participant payments, everybody got about $15 per visit, and then separately we randomized them to the high-low extrinsic quit manipulation with $12 a day or 0. And so we also offered free NRT and brief counseling to make a permanent quit attempt after the study was over. So we definitely wanted to do that to attract the treatment seekers, obviously. We did not want to have to pay them a lot because we don't want people who want to participate because they just want payment. That's what the non-treatment seekers were interested in. But so that's extrinsic quit motivation. We really wanted the intrinsic quit motivation. So we didn't want to have to boost up the payment. We wanted the treatment seekers to come in because, hey, they really want to quit pretty soon, and so they would love to get free patch and help to make that quit attempt. So these are the results. So on the left are the non-treatment seekers, on the right are the treatment seekers. The black bars are the NRT patch, and the white bars are the placebo. So you can see that in each case, if you pay people, so left to right there, you will get them to increase their quit success, as the contingency management literature has been showing for decades, basically. So, but there was no difference in that factor between the 2 groups. But also, if you look at the difference between the black bars and the white bars, and remember, that's what we're really interested in, only the treatment seekers showed the difference between active patch versus placebo patch, and it didn't matter whether you pay them. Yes, they quit more, but it was like this as opposed to this. So they still had the same difference between the active versus placebo. Non-treatment seekers showed nothing. There was no effect of active patch compared to the placebo. And that was exactly what we had hypothesized, and that interaction was very significant. Well, that was fine, but we couldn't say, well, now we have this great new procedure. Let's go and start testing new novel medications. We needed to make sure this was going to generalize to other treatments. So we did exactly the same study with varenicline this time. So you can see same 2x2 between subject factors, high and low treatment seeking status, high and low intrinsic quit, high and low extrinsic quit. Within subject factor was varenicline versus placebo counterbalanced. Similar timeline, although we had to add a week of dose run-up period there. 2 phases, 3 weeks long. Same participant payments, but we offered free Chantix and counseling to all those who wanted to quit after the study was over. So similar results, as you can see. Again, only the treatment seekers showed a really big difference between the active versus placebo medication condition. You'll see that the non-treatment seekers did show a hint of an effect of varenicline, and that's just how robust it is, really. It's the partial agonist actions at the beta-2 receptors is just that powerful, I guess, that it can blunt the effects. So we did get a little success, but the interaction was still significant, so that treatment seekers are the ones that are most sensitive to the active medication. Okay, well, so the conclusion based on this was that sensitivity with a create procedure was shown to both NRT and varenicline as a function of intrinsic quit interest, in other words, treatment seeking. but extrinsic quit interest just didn't matter. So we thought, well, maybe our optimal sample really is just smokers with high intrinsic quit interest, which was my initial hypothesis like 10 years earlier when I was starting. So we just ruled out that extrinsic quit didn't really matter. But we weren't done yet, and one says to the other, oh, if only it were so simple. So if you remember, 4 out of 5 drugs tested in phase 2 fail. So our CREATE procedure was sensitive to effective drugs, but is it also specific? In other words, does it detect lack of efficacy in an ineffective drug? Because unfortunately, that's going to be the most likely outcome of phase 2 testing. So that brings us to our third study, which we tested bupropion versus modafinil versus placebo. So bupropion, obviously, to test CREATE with the third remaining FDA-approved first-line medication. Modafinil, which is FDA-approved for wakefulness, was tested for CREATE's specificity because a previous clinical trial had shown no efficacy at all for modafinil with cessation. So no more between groups factors, no more high-low intrinsic quit, high-low extrinsic. We had settled that with 2 consistent studies showing the same thing. So from then on, it was only smokers high in quit interest, high in intrinsic quit interest. So same monetary conditions, so the within subjects factor of medication was bupropion versus modafinil versus placebo, a double crossover design. So that's shown here. So it's kind of like the varenicline, but with a third 3-week phase added on. And these are the results. So as we hypothesized, bupropion was better than placebo in increasing quit days. Modafinil was not. So these are the results for all 3 of those studies, showing consistently that it's the high intrinsic quit interest that shows the sensitivity to the active versus placebo medication condition, and the low intrinsic quit really doesn't give you much at all. So to answer the questions, do effective cessation medications help all? Does the source of quit motivation matter? Well, high intrinsic quit motivation is critical. And so this leads me to implications. Cessation medications are not like most other medications, in my opinion. So medications to treat diabetes, hypertension, cholesterol, whatever, will likely help the condition of the patient as long as the drug regimen is followed. And I do not feel that that is the case with cessation medications. They can lessen severity withdrawal and help those who are already motivated to remain quit, but no medication causes much quitting on its own in somebody not already trying to quit. And I think a clear implication of that is if you give a prescription to smokers reluctant to quit, it's unlikely to work, and I would say it could even backfire. So I would say the best outcome if you gave a prescription to someone who really wasn't interested in quitting would be that they just simply throw it away, that they don't use it at all. If they use it, what happens? So they're still not interested, and they expect that this is magically just going to take away all their craving and withdrawal and make it really easy to quit, like taking insulin or something like that. But what it could cause is an unrealistic expectation of what a medication can and cannot do. And the experience of taking the drug, even when they're not motivated, and not getting any success at all, could decrease their confidence in the efficacy of any drug, really. So suppose a couple years later, they go back to the doctor and they say, you know, I've had some health problems recently, and I think I do want to finally bite the bullet and quit smoking. What do you got for me? And they say, well, here's another prescription. And they say, you gave me that before. That didn't work. You know, of course, so they have this really bad experience and this bad expectation that it's not going to work because they weren't in the right frame of mind to make it work. So other conclusions, we confirmed the CREATE power with small n. So from that study 3 with 45 smokers high in quit interest, the correlation for days quit was 0.59. So you plug that into that calculation I showed you before, 1 minus 0.59 over 2, you come up with 45 crossover equaling 220 in a randomized trial, 110 in each group. And the correlation was similar for the NRT patch and the varenicline studies. So we had modest dropouts. We had about 22% overall. very few missed sessions, less than 1%. They knew going in that they were going to have to come in every day for the quit week to get tested, and so we just worked with their schedule to make sure that worked. And recruitment and retention was really pretty feasible, and that's consistent with a recent national survey. Terry Pahacek published this, showing that half of all adult smokers state they intend to quit within the next year, 16% in the next month, and then about another third more than 1 or less than 12 months. So they are out there for recruitment. And then the final conclusion for this part of the project, I want to do a step-by-step comparison with the randomized trials. So as I said, it takes a couple hundred folks to be randomized to different conditions in a randomized trial versus our 50 roughly. Study duration, 6 to 12 months for a randomized trial. Per subject is like 4 to 6 weeks for ours. And then finally, the average cost, as I showed you before, was about $10 million. The average cost to us, which I just calculated a couple months ago, was about $700,000 based on the NIH direct cost to PIT for the studies that I just talked about. Now, my salary and my research assistants don't make pharma company salaries, but I don't think that that's the majority of the reason that it's so much cheaper with our procedure. So I provided an overview of some of this research up to this point in previous publications if you want to check them out. And also this work combined with our earlier non-medication behavioral treatment research, such as tailoring CBT in women concerned about weight gain, led to this cognitive behavioral therapy for smoking cessation guidebook that some colleagues of mine at Pitt and I put together about 15 years ago or so. So now we moved on, since we did think that we had a solid, validated, efficient procedure, we moved on to test novel treatments. So the first one that we tested was fenofibrate to repurpose, which is FDA approved for lipid control. So the rationale was that preclinical research had showed that fibrates decreased nicotine self-administration in primates and rodents in the study shown there. So in our study, we did kind of a streamlined baseline, and then the quit week, not much of a dose run-up was needed. And unfortunately, we found no differences. So the quit days are on the left. We got quitting for sure. It just was not different between the fenofibrate and the placebo. We had other measures changed from baseline, were dropped for cigarettes per day and CO, which is not the main outcome. Obviously, we want quit, absolutely, but there was no difference between the medication conditions. So we moved on to the second test with the Janssen drug, an alpha-7 PAM, an alpha-7 positive allosteric modulator of the alpha-7 nicotine receptors. So J&J had developed this to improve cognitive function in schizophrenia, but it didn't quite meet their target endpoints, and so they just discontinued working on it. But our collaborator, Darlene Brunzell at VCU, had a hypothesis about alpha-7 nicotine with nicotine self-administration, and so she worked with it and showed that it did decrease nicotine and self-administration in rodents. So we thought for smoking cessation in humans, J&J would reduce nicotine reinforcement as in the preclinical, but also that it would attenuate the adverse cognitive effects of abstinence, so the loss of attention, working memory, et cetera, especially in those with schizophrenia who were the population studied by Janssen in the first place. So what we did here was 2 concurrent studies, nearly identical, but just differing in the sample that was studied. So study 1 was healthy smokers wanting to quit, just like the earlier ones I showed you before, exactly the same. I oversaw that one. Then a colleague of mine at Pitt, Dr. Roy Chengapa, studied smokers with schizophrenia wanting to quit. So we had the same compensation issues, conditions, looked at CO less than 5. We also looked at CO less than 8 because the funders said, well, we want you to relate your results to the literature, and CO less than 8 is still widely used in the literature, so we also looked at that as an endpoint as well. And then secondary measures of withdrawal and craving. So this is the timeline, very much like varenicline with the dose run-up week, and then the quit week, and then the stop med, and repeat the same 3 weeks later. And so the other same procedures, free treatment for a permanent quit after they finished the study. Unfortunately, as you can see on the top, the left is the study 1 with healthy smokers. At the right are the bars, study 2 with smokers with schizophrenia. The top is the quit days, no differences between active and placebo. Middle is withdrawal. And then the third line is craving, no differences in the schizophrenia. And actually, in our study, for some weird reason, those who got the active medication had an increase in craving, for reasons I'm not sure at all. And so in the bottom panel there on the right is just adverse possible symptom severity in the smokers with schizophrenia, just to see if there was any adverse response, and there wasn't anything. So to briefly summarize, our phase 2 CREATE procedure showed sensitivity to all 3 FDA-approved medications, specificity to known lack of efficacy in modafinil, and then in the tests of the novel drugs, no efficacy in fenofibrate or the J&J alpha-7 PAM. So that was disappointing with lack of efficacy in the phase 2, but we realized, of course, that lack of efficacy in phase 2 is very common with any novel compound tested. As I said, 4 out of 5 on average are not going to make it, they're going to fail. So I would argue that CREATE clearly meets the main goal of an early phase 2 procedure, to reach a go, no-go decision quickly and inexpensively, basically a fail-fast approach. So in terms of potential future directions, clearly want to be testing other novel cessation drugs, and repurposing is really an ideal system or setup, I think, for this. So medications FDA approved for other indications already show safety in phase 1. They've already passed through phase 1, maybe gone on to look at something else that maybe didn't work or did work and was approved, but they've already made it through phase 1. So if they've already made it through phase 1, you can just slip it right in easily to test efficacy in phase 2. That was basically what the J&J drug that we looked at had. It went through phase 1, was safe, went to phase 2, failed with one thing. We looked at it with phase 2 with another, unfortunately didn't work either. But the key example here, of course, is bupropion. That's the big success story. It was approved as Wellbutrin for depression, and then later as Zyban. And I was thinking, well, if we had had this procedure 30 years ago, we could have tested bupropion right off the bat with our procedure, and we would have been the ones to discover that it was effective. Not Linda Ferry, but she did a great job to show it and to move it on to into phase 2 and phase 3. And then there are many other drugs that have been attempts at repurposing other drugs. The table I showed you before on the left with all the different drugs tested, many of them were repurposing efforts. Other examples would be non-smoke nicotine products. There are just a million coming out all the time, basically. The heated tobacco, non-medicinal oral nicotine versions. And in particular, I think our procedure might be very good at helping with recruiting subgroups of smokers who are really hard to recruit because of the large power with small sample sizes. Examples are smokers with comorbid conditions like schizophrenia in our project. Individual differences. So here, you don't have a single sample like we've been doing, but you have 2 samples, and because they get both drug conditions, that's still far more efficiently to see a difference between the 2 than if you take a huge sample, randomize them to 2 conditions, and then another huge sample, and randomize them. And one example here is sex differences. Not that men and women are hard to recruit separately, it's just an example of if you have a hypothesis of systematic differences between 2 groups in terms of the efficacy of a drug for one more than the other, this might be a way to look at it. So this is from a meta-analysis that we did 15 years ago almost, looking at men versus women in quit success on NRT patch and placebo patch from all the studies we could find that reported the results that way, reported men and women and nicotine versus placebo. So what we found was for men, it was about 20% versus 11% quit on nicotine versus placebo. For women, it was just under 15% versus 10%. So we did the interaction there, and it was significant. So another example would be smokers differing on specific genotypes of interest, and so precision medicine. So this I don't want to make too much of, but this is from our first study with nicotine patch. So I was working with Karen and her group at Penn, and they were very focused on genetic factors predicting smoking cessation outcome. So we obtained DNA in this study and then went back and took a look at it. So this is purely post hoc. But in the beta-2 receptor genotype, we found that the GG did show a significant difference between the active versus placebo patch, and the others, the AA and AG, did not. And then we had other outcomes at the lower right that showed a similar pattern. But I don't want to make too much out of this at all. It was purely post hoc, and after the fact, we had to do a lot of other controls because of the other conditions involved. It's just an example of how this approach might be useful. So, and I just want to try and finish up close, almost done, with the double crossover procedure. So I showed that, and it was 9 weeks, so 3 3-week conditions. So it's a little more laborious, but I think that this might have even more application than most others. So when you're looking at a novel medication, you probably don't want to know, is it better than placebo? That's okay, but there are other drugs out there now. And so if it's better than placebo, but it's not as good as varenicline or Zyban or whatever, what's the point? There's not going to be a market there for it. So what you want to do is, how does this stack up with the possible competing medications out there? And so that's why novel drug, effective comparator, and placebo might come in handy. That was much like the bupropion, modafinil, and placebo study that we ran. So that might be a useful approach. Another use for this double crossover is looking at 2 different doses of active medication. So you might not be sure what would be the best dose for an upcoming larger phase 2 trial. So you want to see, well, this low dose has a lot more safety, but it might not be as efficacious. Well, this one is probably going to be more efficacious, but boy, there could be some safety issues. So we're going to test them together along with placebo. And then finally, you could also look at combination therapies versus monotherapy. So is adding another treatment on top of an existing one better than that one alone? And of course, support for this comes from a UK report looking at all the different interventions available and concluded that the combination treatments are definitely better than each one alone. So almost my final slide. What we've done recently is to look at trying to make this a lot less burdensome to participants. So the biggest example is like, having them come in every day for a CO check is just kind of old school. It really is. So these days, everybody's got smartphones and they can take video of themselves, and you give them a monitor and they can take it and email that video in. And Jesse Dallery down at the University of Florida is where the lower example comes from. He's been working on this for at least a decade or so. We did a pilot of that, and that's what the large graph is shown here. We had morning COs, and then they came in for their in-person visit, and we just lined up the 2 COs that they had given us. We knew, they said if they had smoked or not, but we just wanted to see if there was practical application. It was feasible to get the CO just by the by the video CO. And these days, I have not used Bedfont's ICO monitor, but that does it by itself, I guess. You blow into it, and it's connected, I think, by a USB port to the computer, and you just email it right in. So there's a lot of technical advances recently that allows a simple CO check to be a lot more efficiently obtained than our day-to-day visits, which hopefully we can move away from going forward. Okay, so almost final. This is my current research. I'm collaborating on a U01 to look at alpha-3 beta-4 receptor partial agonist novel medication with Dr. Nurzaveri at Astria Therapeutics. And these are my collaborators and assistants. So thank you very much for the award, and thank you very much for your attention. And I guess there's time for questions.
Hi, Ken.
Yeah.
Hello? Can you hear me?
I can barely hear somebody.
Okay, there we go. Hi, Ken. Matt Bars from the FDNY Tobacco Treatment Program. First off, congratulations and thank you for this. I would like to know how you square the findings in the early 90s with bupropion and replicated with Chantix regarding motivation We found that with bupropion, for example, even in unmotivated smokers, it decreased their time to quit, attempted quit, by half. And similar findings were found with varenicline. And I'm just wondering how that relates to your finding regarding intrinsic motivation.
I'm not sure I understand completely the question and the other literature you're talking about. So I would just say that if someone is clearly not motivated, and I had a discussion with Nancy Rigatti here earlier this morning about what, so all we did, so we wanted to distinctly differ between quit motivation. So quit, people who, so and I defined how they were. So they wanted to quit in the next couple months, treatment seekers, then they had to meet other, and they had to say that reliably with each contact. And then the other ones had to say, I'm not interested in quitting at least in the next 6 months, no way.
That was the population that I'm referring to. These people were unmotivated to quit going in.
All right, well, I would say varenicline does seem to have that impact because it blunts the effects of the rewarding effects of nicotine coming into the brain, basically. Bupropion, I'm not as certain how that would act, and I'm not familiar with other studies that have shown bupropion helps people who are not interested at all in quitting. And does it move them towards?
Yes. This was a group of people who were unmotivated to quit. They were interested in cutting down, but not motivated to quit. And versus placebo, they moved towards an attempted quit at half the time. Those in
well, and I guess I would ask, what was their outcome, basically? So I want to see what's their,
it's been a long time since I read the paper, but there was a statistical significant difference, if I recall.
So it increased their motivation to quit, and they made a quit attempt.
Which was successful.
Well, I don't know exactly which was successful. If it was at final point prevalence or something at whatever months, there was a difference between what, placebo and the active or whatever?
That's my recollection, yes.
Okay, well, I don't know. I guess I'll look at that literature or that study later. I'm not familiar with it, so I guess.
Well, thank you anyway.
I'm sorry.
Suchitra Krishnan Saran from Yale. Hi, Ken. Thank you for a very nice talk and congratulations on your award. And thank you for this fascinating model you presented to us. I think it's got a lot of utility in screening meds. I'm going back to your findings on the alpha-7 allosteric modulator. That was a little disappointing that you didn't find anything. And I was thinking about it and wondering, one of the problems with repurposing a lot of these drugs is the dose that you test, that you choose to test. Was there some developmental work that had been done on picking which dose of the drug to use in your trials?
You're talking about the J&J alpha?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, well, part of that was from the safety data that had already been collected, and also there was some translation from the animal research based on, with maxing out at the safe dose. So we went up as high as you could with that and related it to the animal data.
Right.
So but that, the animal data, and I've had discussions with this with other people, that's a whole other issue that I don't want to get into because I'm not an animal researcher, but I just don't think that there is a very good animal model for, you don't have animals who want to quit. That's not really what, I don't know how you do that, basically.
Right. No, I agree.
Animal work is great for abuse liability, safety and toxicity, whatever. It's really good to do that. But how you can simulate the quit process exactly with animal models, I just think, and Steve Negus, who's a well-known basic researcher with other drugs of abuse, has a commentary this past fall talking all about the lack of translation from preclinical to clinical work. And I do think it's an issue, but that's not my area, so I don't have much that I can offer to it.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. In the work that we are doing in the area of alcohol drinking, we are actually finding that with some of these drugs, lower doses work better than maxing out at a maximum dose. So just something to consider with some of these medications.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Kim Richter, University of Kansas. Thanks for the wonderful talk. I wanted to clarify, did the extrinsic motivators increase sensitivity to the nicotine patch? And if so, could one conclude that for non-treatment seekers, people need additional motivation to benefit from medication. And also, I wondered if you'd been using this design with looking for drugs for other addictions.
Well, first of all, we didn't see anything with increasing extrinsic quit motivation. As the contingency management literature shows, that will increase quitting overall. It doesn't increase the sensitivity between the active drug and the placebo. That's why we have the crossover, basically. In terms of using it, the reason I call it crossover evaluation of addiction treatment efficacy is with the expectations that it's probably relevant for other drugs, but I have not tested. And there are some real things to think about. The dose run-up of the drug is certainly going to be a big deal. The washout period is going to be a consideration. And different drugs, it's never been tested, so I don't know. I think there has been interest in using it for alcohol and maybe some others, but as far as I know, it hasn't been validated for those other purposes so far.
Hey, Ken. Imad Damaj from VCU. Thank you and congratulations on your award and excellent presentation. I think your model will definitely enhance that translational and talk back and forth between animal models and human testing. But I want to go back to Suchitra's comments on alpha-7. These PAM are kind of weird compounds, especially the J&J compound, because they're mixed what we call PAM1, PAM2. So the doses are kind of inverted U shape. So pushing the dose high may really, the effect may be lost at higher doses. Okay. The other issue is, what kind of measures you have to rely on in terms of animal models. Fenofibrate, for example, may decrease in rodents and monkeys the intake, but in fact, in our hand, and we publish it, it fails to reduce withdrawal. So I think there should be better discussion and communication between how can we improve in the animal models, our outcome measure that could help you into moving a compound.
Well, I would almost say, and again, I'm not an expert, but yeah. I would say, so you have a nicotine-dependent animal, and then you extinguish or you cut off, and then you induce this
withdrawal.
Curative medication to see if it lessens withdrawal compared to the saline. I would say that, even that isn't going to get you that far, but I would think that might have more validity than a nicotine self-administration reduction of the drug. Because I would say, well, if you have a drug that you think might be really good for harm reduction in humans, well, nicotine self-administration reduction, sure, that makes sense, but not for absolute abstinence necessarily. Okay. So if it attenuates withdrawal, I would say that probably is a pretty good mix. But those kinds of measures are not, those are what I would call secondary measures. That's why we went with 24-hour abstinence. We said there's no question that that's actual abstinence. And if you count those up, if you have more of those, you're doing better at quitting than if you have fewer of them, no matter what the withdrawal is. We did assess withdrawal and craving and saw the efficacy. And I believe we did see the same between the treatment seekers and non-seekers. But really, it was the quit data that was most robust in terms of the differences.
Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much.